harvest methods. I would try to talk to them about alternative fishing methods that were sustainable, and all the time I watched more and more fishermen giving up their way of life due to the declining fisheries. I began to read about marine protected areas during my internet research, and then I applied to the Monterey Bay Marine Sanctuary's Advisory Council, hoping that if I begin to work with them, maybe I can make a difference there. And then after coming onto the council, the state came along and enacted the MPA. And I don't really want to say they enacted it, because it was enacted a long time ago, but they enforced it. And I was really encouraged for one of the very first times. This map shows you global MPAs that already exist, and somebody had asked about that earlier. You know, are there other MPAs out there? And when I was doing research, I was encouraged by how many MPAs exist globally. Lots of other parts of the world had positive impacts, and they were measurable, they were tangible impacts. In the Solomon Islands, the marine conservation area has been operating since 1992, and the socioeconomic impact of that has been incredible. There's tangible evidence of alternative income generating activities for fishers, increasing income and reducing their poverty. In Fiji, where there are more than 60 locally managed marine areas, they have several no-take studied areas. They have significantly increased clams and mangrove lobster populations, and they are the primary cause of a 30% increase in household income in just that one area. Appo Island was the one that really got me excited. I watched some videos and they talked to fishermen. But in the central region of the Philippines, they've had a no-take area since 1979. And this has resulted in increased fish catches per unit of effort, increased tourism, both resulting from setting aside an area of a reef as a no-take zone. In the video I talked about, the fishermen were these incredible foes, you know, kind of what we all endured when we were putting together the MPAs, or we had our public hearings and the fishermen showed up, and they were angry and they were concerned, and they had some legitimate concerns that they voiced. And kind of like what we're seeing now in the Southern California region with the recreational fishermen, where we're beginning to see the biomass of the fish increasing, and the recreational fishermen are also seeing it. Now they're becoming very excited. Well, in the Appo Islands, where it's a very poverty-stricken area, the fishermen created their own police force, or ranger force, so to speak, where they took turns. They went out and enforced. How do we create enforcement? Because it's great that we've put them there, but now we need to enforce them, and we need to educate people. And the more that we can do that, then the more successful that they are going to be. Conservation of our oceans requires us to protect them, to manage them in an eco-based management system. It's going to require fundamental changes, not just in the fisheries, but also in our agriculture, in our industry, in the way that we consume energy, and the way that we obtain energy. We need to begin protecting our marine resources so that we'll have a resource for later on. We need to really get serious now about our personal use of energy. And I know everybody's thinking about that now. We're looking at the gas prices. And we need to put the environment at the top of our political agendas, and we need to demand that our leaders begin to act. No matter how we do this, we have to treat management actions as experiments, and we've got to refine them as we move along. Nothing that we decide to do today can't be altered just a little bit to make it better as we move along. And that's going to be really, really important. We need to create changes with informed input from the fishermen whose livelihoods depend on the ocean. And we need to be able to communicate to these fishermen, these species of men and women who are also an endangered species of themselves. They face extinction in our fisheries, right along with the dwindling resource of our own fisheries. And we need to convince them and help them realize that these marine protected areas are going to benefit them. And I think that with the help of the recreational fishermen who are already experiencing those benefits, it is going to get a little bit easier. We need to ask ourselves, how do we affect the ocean and how does the ocean affect us? Right here in Monterey Bay at the turn of the century, we had absolutely no kelp. It was barren of the kelp. And the reason it was barren of the kelp is because we had hunted the otters to near extinction. And the otters feed on sea urchins. And the sea urchins are grazers, and without something feeding on them, they grazed along and grazed away all of our kelp. And without the kelp, which acts as a nursery for a lot of the rockfish out there, Monterey Bay was vastly different from what it is now. And in nearshore communities like ours, the kelp out here can get to heights of 250 feet, and it can grow 22 inches a day. It's the fastest growing plant on the face of the earth. Sorry, I lost my spot here. Anyways, as late as 1969, we began to see the otters begin making a rebound, and that's when they actually began to study the kelp forests again, because they couldn't study them prior to that, because there wasn't really a forest to study. But currently, what is happening right now up in Alaska is sea otters are continuing to decline, and we have learned that the otters influence a terrestrial animal. The complex food web linkage reaches 5 different food chain levels. It goes from the sea otters to the sea urchins, to the kelp, to the marine fish, and the bald eagles who go down and fish the marine fish. The lesson of how we're impacting our environment that we know so little about by the removal of a single species is disturbing, at the very least to me. We've got to consider the species that we are removing at alarming speed. What are the other species that they're affecting? How is that affecting our food web? Our food web is an integral part to all of us. We don't fully understand the effects we have on the ocean environment, and I've learned that if there's any hope for my children's children to enjoy half the childhood that I did, we need to protect our resource. So if I'm going to continue supporting my family with the harvest of the ocean's resources, I'd have to make sure that every single dollar that I spend is spent supporting the fishermen who have learned to fish in what I term backwards. I mean, this has been very interesting for us because 14 years ago I used to say, oh, is that a line-caught fish? And I couldn't find line-caught fish. And I meant a pole fish or hand-line-caught fish. And as the sustainability movement moved on, you can go anywhere now and almost see a little piece of paper under the thing that says line-caught fish. But now, line-caught fish means long line caught. So now I've had to change and say, is that pole caught or is that hand line caught? So as the sustainability for fish movement moves along, so does the marketing of the very large corporate harvesters.